Who's this?
Pardon me?
That's not my father.
Oh, we've taken the wrong one.
God, I hate funerals, don't you? They're just so depressing. Just the whole, I don't know, it's just the death and everything.
If there's anything I can do, Sandra. Oh, don't put your hand there, dear. You'll leave smudge marks.
Bro, and who's this?
You know, I asked myself the same thing when my dad passed. I said, who is this man?
No, who's in this coffin? Because that's not my father. You got Jackie Chan in there! It's not Burger King. You can't just mess up my order. I cannot wait for this day to be over.
Okay, so we're talking about foreign films and their American, predominantly American remakes. Yep. So do you want to start with comedy or horror?
Don't mind. Do you want to start with comedy? Because it's probably
the freshest in our minds. Yeah, let's start with comedy. So we're looking at Death at a Funeral. Yeah. And how, I think, when the original was British, and when was it made? Like 2007?
2010.
2010
was the British one, and then 2013, I think, was the American one.
Okay. So firstly, why do you think they remade it?
It would have been way too dry. It was too British, basically, for American audiences.
Okay.
I guess the same way that like they had to remake The Office, the same way a lot of British things get remade is that it was a remarkably funny film, but I can totally understand how American audiences, it would just go right over their head. Mm-hmm. I think I always remember that when Monty Python was released in the States, they I don't think it went down too well, but in Canada, Monty Python went down an absolute storm because they kind of have that sort of British
quirky
empire, kind of quirky humour about them as well. But it worked so well in the American version. So we watched the American version first, and you can tell how it. You could see how it was going to go, and you could see sort of like I can see how the British version of this would work and how it wouldn't work in America, but. I hadn't realised until I watched the British one that it was basically word for word a remake.
And Peter Dinklage, is it Dinklage? Yeah, he's in both. Yeah. And I was like, is that weird? I couldn't figure out if that was really weird.
I think it's really weird.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was. I don't know when Game of Thrones started, so I don't know.
It would have been like around that time where it was just getting massive. You've got like a guy which had made himself like an A-list celebrity around that time, so it would make sense to keep him in both films.
Oh, okay, right, yeah. It was quite amazing how well it worked without really changing much to do with the script, but in two very different sort of like story paths. So I mean, two very different like kinds of characters. So you wouldn't have like Chris Rock wouldn't work well in the British version, but then I can't remember the guy who plays Chris Rock's character in the British version.
Yeah, I'm not sure the name.
But he'd make an amazing George Osborne if anyone was ever going to make some sort of like political film about the Cameron years. Like usually with these things, when you get American remakes of things, they're totally different. You know, they really sort of Americanise them up, and I usually think it makes them a little bit worse because they take some sort of character out of the originals. Usually, like in a lot of horror stuff, so like the original martyrs and the American martyrs is like totally different, and the American inside is different from the French inside. But this one, was shockingly like scene for scene, word for word remake,
and yet so different. And I didn't say it because I know you guys liked it. I absolutely slated it.
The American one,
because I saw the British one years ago, and I was like, immediately, I was like, oh, this is fun. Like that first scene, where he's just like, it's not my dad.
It's the wrong one.
And then they're like, oh, sorry. And then immediately go, and it's just like a bam, one gag. That was funny. Move on. And I just think the American version is the epitome of everything's bigger and louder in America. And it just, all the gags had to be like.
They were a little bit more, it's like
OTT.
Yeah, so like the, like that's a great example about the That's Not My Dad. and when you look at the body in the coffin,
That did make me laugh, though.
it's Chinese.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
But I think if that character had been black, I think maybe the audience would have gone like, I don't get it. What do you mean it's not?
Yeah.
Well, how do you know it's not your dad? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas like they didn't have to do it in the British one. Because I was waiting for that. I was like, what like ethnicity are they going to put in the coffin?
But I think it dumbs it down. Like, and with the British one, I feel like the director kind of respects the audience a bit more to be like, they'll get this. And you do. Yeah. And I think I enjoyed it. I did tear it to pieces because I was just like, it's got really wacky music and it's kind of like the director doesn't trust the audience to get the gags. So it's like, oh, here's a gag and here's some wacky music to make sure you get it. And then I wrote down, it's probably ironic because you need the music anyway because the funny bits aren't funny. Like, but that was me being really mean. Yeah.
No, but I like, as you say, the sort of the over the top things with it. Like there's a lot of things I was saying to you before. I think I was saying to Lee before that. Like I preferred the old infirmed uncle, although Danny Glover was like really funny in it. When you watch the British one, I was crying with laughter at some of the stuff because he's just like a British Father Jack.
Yeah,
he's just grumpy and like the fiance who takes the Valium. In the American one, it's more like a sort of like American Pie type spoof. Like something crazy is going to happen, whereas in the British one, it was just naturally more funny. You know?
I think the American one would have to be more sort of bombastic and like out there because
bombastic's a good word.
When you've got sort of Kevin Hart and Chris Tucker,
Chris
Rock, sorry,
the other,
they are like two of the sort of louder stand-up guys, which took pages clean out of Eddie Murphy's playbook. So it just fits that style of comedy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. For me, Chris Rock can't lead a film. I just don't believe him. I think he might be an amazing stand-up, but he just couldn't lead the film for me, and I just didn't buy into it. I really like Zoe Saldana.
Right.
Not sure where. She's in Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
Yeah.
She played the wife.
She's the sister who gives her fiance.
I really
like her. Yeah.
But then you've got and maybe this is a very British thing, so it might not be fair. But the British version of her was Daisy Donovan, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's Daisy Donovan!" I got so excited, like being an old. Was it the 11 o'clock show that she was on with Ian Lee? And just realising that because I find that with some things where you might like go, "Oh god, they were in space for a couple of episodes or something," and so that's
nice
sort
feeling.
of like that really like bumped up, as I say, the British side for me again with that. And the guy who played like the incompetent like friend who had to chauffeur around the uncle all the time. Have you ever seen a TV show called Campus?
Are we talking about the American or the British one?
Sorry, the British one.
No, but I've seen him in plays.
Okay, yeah.
Good plays.
Yeah, so I was rattling my brain for ages to think what he's from, and he plays basically the principal of this university in this TV show called Campus. But and so that was Tracy Morgan's part in the American one, and I think he played the bumbling idiot a bit better than Tracy Morgan did because Tracy Morgan's a bit older than him, and you kind of had that sort of short, fat, jolly man like playing the comic role a bit better in the British one. But yeah, I mean, it's it was just nice to see that they hadn't completely gone too far away from the original in it, and you sort of think you can get why they had to make it because, as I say, the British version was the whole delivery of it, like we were saying before, it's just a lot different in the British one, and you kind of need that like star aspect, like Lee was saying, of Chris Rock. To play the lead, although there probably would have been better people to play the more frustrated side, but there was enough comedy bits in it to keep it in as being like what's the film with all the stand-up comedians in that's about stand-up comedians, and it's done with Adam Sandler. And
what's he doing in a comedy?
No, he produced it. Yeah. But it's got like Chris Rock and Kevin Hart and everyone in it, and I think like Norm Macdonald was in it as well. But anyway, that's by the by. I enjoyed both films, but as I say before, like I laughed in the American one. I was crying laughing in the British one.
Same.
It was just, it was so British. It was ridiculous.
To be fair, I did think like even with the American versions, they always have a gloss.
Yeah,
I always think.
yeah,
And
yeah.
as soon as I started watching the British one this morning, again, just to remind myself, it's got that horrible grey British
There was no
grainy quality, and you immediately see the difference between. Well, I actually saw an interview with Stephen Fry where he pegged like the difference between American comedy and British comedy. Is the American always comes out the hero in the end, whilst the Brit always comes out the loser in the end,
got
and
the
that's what people find funny in both those countries,
Yeah,
which is really interesting.
And you've got the sort of like the glossy, as I say, it was kind of a bit more slapstick of the American side. So the bit where they're trying to, like, they throw Peter Dinklage over the back of the sofa, whereas in the British one, they're sort of clumsily trying to place him round because you go, actually, it's a bit more serious what's going on. But I think it's just that, like, uptight, like, kind of British, like, everything's going to be fine. Don't worry, there's disaster going on around us.
It
but
is so
it's fine.
British.
Whereas they sort of embrace, like, the craziness and, like, oh, it doesn't matter that there's, like, there's a dwarf hogtied in the study and all this sort of thing.
I have to say though, like the bit with the young girl where the writer brother fancies the young girl,
Yes.
I thought that was kind of verging on a little bit rapey because he was
Oh,
like,
it's totally rapey, yeah.
ooh, 17, 18 and I was just like, I think this is really missing the mark here, and it's playing with fire. You know?
I was quite glad though that in the British one they didn't really follow through with that story too much, whereas obviously in the American one he left with her in the car and you'd be like,
right
oh,
into it.
God. But yeah, it was a little bit. I think she was just like that. If she'd have been like a few years older,
it would have
and
been
it had been like,
different.
oh, now she's mid-20s, and it's like I haven't seen her since she was this age. But the fact that you go, oh, she's still like 18 or 17 or whatever it was.
No, not that this is the problem. But
Go on.
The other thing is, it wasn't believable either. If he'd have come in and there'd been like his character had been built where he had a string of bestsellers or something like that, there was no reason for this fat middle-aged man to romance this 18-year-old girl. It was a bit weird.
Yeah.
The other thing I found weird was the other relationship-wise was the white guy, poor man's. What did we say last night?
Owen Wilson.
Poor man's Owen Wilson. I forgot his real
Yes,
name.
Owen Wilson's brother.
Is it Owen Wilson's brother?
Yeah.
That'll be it then.
That makes a lot of sense.
When he kissed her, I was like, that's a bit full on as well. Like, that's also not funny.
But the weird thing about that was as well is you've got the father trying to push this fat middle-aged white man on his doorstep. And that seemed really weird too.
Yeah, that's odd. It took me a while. His British counterpart, Ewan Bremner, it took me so long to get his English accent into thing because obviously I'm used to seeing him as like Spud in Trainspotting. And so, that took me a little bit while. But I think he played it a bit better because it was almost like he was like a sleazy British rock star. Kind of ex-boyfriend thing. He wouldn't take no for an answer. So that kind of worked a bit better. But that as soon as he opened his mouth there, I was like, oh, hello.
Well, we said they got the characters wrong way around, didn't they? In the American one.
In the American one.
If you'd have had Owen Wilson's brother as the boyfriend in the first place, then it would have made more sense. That young hunky guy was trying to be the tempter.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, you're right.
He played, your man who played Cyclops.
Yes.
Yeah, but no, I think, overall, I enjoyed both of them. The American one was kind of like a switch off. It wouldn't matter if it was terrible or not.
Zone in and out.
But the British one was, just
I'd like to be in a play version of the British one. I think that would be awesome on stage.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's move on to Rec and Quarentine.
Tranquilízate. Bien.
Did you watch?
I've seen
I've
Quarantine.
seen them both.
I haven't. Okay, I watched Rec quite a while ago.
Okay.
And as I was saying to Lee before, didn't get the chance to rewatch it again because realised at 8 o'clock this morning when I started watching Quarentine that it was a stupid thing to ask of people to watch 4 films in 4 days, you know, who are like parents and have full-time work.
Yeah.
But I remember really liking Rec and finding the quality of it kind of reminded me a little bit 70s horror, which we've talked about in the past and I absolutely love. And again, Quarantine, I didn't think it was bad, but it did have that American gloss.
It did, but it had... You also felt like it was missing a few millions from the budget somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely was. So I'd already seen both of these, and funnily, when I'd watched them in as order as you can, because Rec came out in 2017 and Quarantine came out in 2018.
Right.
So it shows you how fast they pushed this remake through. Yeah. It was ridiculous. There's just like a bit of history. So it's like a found footage film. So it's all done with this. Film crew go into an apartment block and it's overrun by like zombies or the infected. It's that kind of like classic sort of tale. And so, as I say, this was 2007 and there'd only really been like a handful of found footage films before that. The first one was like Cannibal Holocaust in the 80s. And then there was like a big jump really until I've made some notes, 98, where there was a film called The Last Broadcast, which is basically what inspired the Blair Witch Project, which came out the year later. Now, the Blair Witch Project had a budget of $60,000, right? So, and you know, like the sort of quality that they made with that. The Last Broadcast had $900.
Oh, wow.
Was The Last Broadcast, is that like something to do with aliens or Bigfoot or something?
Yeah, so sort of. So it's about 4 guys who go into the woods to find the legend of the Jersey Devil, which is like a creature with like a flying creature that thinks only one of them comes out alive.
Is it good?
Spoilers.
I know, yeah. Sorry.
Cheers, Martyn.
It is good. I think if you watch it in the context that it led to Blair Witch Project, then you can sort of appreciate it. It's like we spoke before about it's a bit thing, but if you bear in mind that it helps.
It helped a bigger power.
Yeah. And so, like obviously, just fast forward in a few years, and when Rec came out in 2007, it was a bit of a funny year, I guess, for horror because Rec is Spanish.
Yeah.
And it was at the time when like European horror was like big. So you had like Hostel and Saw had come out in America, and people were all about like this sort of like over the top horror.
Portugal.
And like we have to, and like we have to see them having their eyes burnt out and all this sort of stuff. But Europe had actually been doing that for quite a few years before. So I don't know if you know, there's a film called High Tension. That I can't even remember whether we spoke about this before, but that came out in 2003, and it's basically about 2 teenage girls who are in the countryside, and there's a killer after them, and so there's a big twist at the end. But essentially, that was kind of like quite gratuitous, sort of violence in it. And so by the time Rec was coming out, that was already at like cult status in sort of like the horror world. So the same year that Rec came out, 28 weeks later came out, Paranormal Activity was out, Saw 4 and 30 Days of Night came out. So
all in the same week?
Not in the same week,
right,
in the same year. But as far as I know, yeah. But as far as like
big budget
horror and like styles of horror goes, you usually have it in waves where you're like, we've got the fan footage happening, this sort of thing, and then the gornos and things.
Sci-fi.
But this was like all sorts of stuff that was coming out. And as far as the European stuff goes, The Orphanage came out in 2007, which I don't know.
That's one of my favourite horror films.
Yeah. So that was Spanish as well. But then in France, you had Inside came out, which is amazing. If you've never seen it, that could possibly pass the Bechdel test.
Oh.
That's got Alison Paradis, who do you know Vanessa Paradis, the singer? Not personally, obviously, she did Joe La Taxi. Anyway, it's her sister and a French actress called Beatrice Dalle. Amazing. And that's like over the top bloody. So that came out. And then another film called Frontiers came out as well, which is about a bank job that went wrong. And they escaped the country, but unfortunately they hide out in a house that's got a load of cannibal Nazis in it. So it's as it happens.
Time.
Yeah. So those two European horror films came out the same year as Rec. For bear in mind that the year after Martyrs came out, so we're right in the absolute thick of like quality European horror, which is probably why Quarantine was made so fast because they thought, well, we'll pick up on the coattails of this.
Get in on this, yeah.
Yeah, because they did. There was a Martyrs remake and there was an Inside remake as well. I don't think there was a remake of any of the others, but there was obviously like a little run there where they were doing these like just it doesn't matter what it's like. It's European and it's French or it's Spanish and it's horror. It's gonna make us a.
What is it with European horror that makes it so terrifying?
I think because it's close to home, but it's
much scarier than British horror, for instance.
Yeah, the culture's just a little bit different, so it seems foreign enough.
Right. Yeah.
But we're really like I always think American culture is kind of ingrained in us, but it's still way over there. Whereas like French and Spanish culture we can identify with because it's like we go on holiday there more often and we learn French or Spanish in school or German in school, the language.
But it's still a bit mysterious for the same reason why Japanese horror is so terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it could be a bit mythology but like maybe as kids we've been to France and we've walked through streets that you sort of go, oh, I could have been murdered down that street. You know, I got lost in Naples once, and we took a wrong turn. I was like, oh God, we're on the set of Gomorrah. We need to get out of here now. You know? So maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's it. Maybe it is the thing of it being in a foreign language that makes it still a bit more mysterious. And if you're watching it subtitled, you've really got to concentrate on what's going on, and so you get, I don't know, maybe you get a bit connected with the characters a bit more.
Maybe.
But yeah, I like just sort of going back to Rec itself with like this, like found footage films, and it happened with Blair Witch Project, and it happened with Cloverfield, because the camera's all over the place. You've got to keep people sort of interested and make sure they're not feeling too like seasick or whatever.
Yeah, queasy.
You know? So you kind of need to keep them feeling easy, but quite disorientated at the same time. And the best way to do that is to mess with the lighting. So you can keep it really dark. So something like Cloverfield kicks off at night time and you don't see the monster for ages. And then when you do, it's a bit like it's there and then it's gone.
Yeah.
Again, you're like, whoa, hold on, what was that? And so putting it in this like apartment block where there's loads of dark corridors and a lot of the apartments, the people are already dead, so the lights are switched off and things. And like there's like the bit near the end there where the thing comes down from the attic space and just like grabs them and sort of pulls them off into the darkness. That's like a great trick in found footage thing, and I think Rec did it really well. As you say, it kind of had that like grainy 70s horror thing because it didn't have the sheen of the American one. Whereas the American one I found to be like a bit lighter, and it had Jennifer Carpenter in it, who like this when they made this is right in the middle of Dexter, so she was a big TV star at the time. And I think we can relate more to something like Rec because we don't know the actors. Why we relate so much to the Blair Witch Project because nobody knew who they were before or after. You know?
I definitely find a horror film a lot less scary, no matter how good the performance is. If it's a big star, I just don't find it as scary. They can do like an Oscar-worthy horror performance, and I'll still be like,
it's not happening.
Doesn't hit home quite as well.
I think that was why there was a great balance with Toni Collette in Hereditary, because. And I know that she's done other things since, but she's still Muriel in my head. Yeah. And so she's got a lot older. She's obviously, since Muriel's wedding, she's lost a ton of weight and things. So you kind of go, oh, it's Toni Collette, but you can just forget that she's been in anything else, you know.
Yeah, she is one of the exceptions.
Yeah. But like as far as, you know, like megastardom or whatever goes, this is where for me it starts getting into like franchises. So Saw started off really well, and the more that you related to the characters and things in it, it's why like in the 80s things became like such a big franchise, because you stopped being scared of Michael Myers and scared of Freddy because they wanted to turn them into household names because you started identifying with them all the time, you know. And so even though like you didn't see Robert Englund's face, you attached Freddy to this like, oh, he's me mate. You know,
Child's Play is an excellent example of
Child's
that.
Play is a brilliant example of that. As soon as they started giving Chucky more of a personality, you were like, oh, he's quite funny, actually. It's like, he's a funny killer. So, yeah, I get the whole, like, if you can use relatively unknown actors, it's a far scarier experience.
Yeah. That might play into coming back to why European horrors... I think maybe it's, like you say, American culture is ingrained in us, and we're only partially in sync with European cultures. Yeah. And so that in itself is a little bit unsettling because the way they do things a little bit different. Just anyone doing something a little bit differently, like you see it in a cult film, like if someone acts and you're just like, oh, that's a bit off. But with European culture, that could be the norm for them. But because it's odd to us, I think it adds to the horror because you're just a bit unsettled.
We've all been on holiday somewhere. Italy's a prime example of this, especially if you go into Milan or something like that, where they seem to hate everybody. And as soon as you
rocked up at Milan Fashion Week with sandals and socks. What else did you expect?
As soon as you're in the middle of a city centre, realising that you can say hello, goodbye, and please can I have a beer, then you've no other form of communication. So there's that language barrier is scary, even if it's a normal,
not a horror situation.
Yeah. If you think that, if you're in a place and you don't know how to say help,
yes,
then it does. You become, your senses become a lot more heightened and a lot more aware. And I think that's probably it in watching the film. Is that you have to look at it more and you're taking it all in. And so, whereas you would have been on edge in like a scary jump scene, now you're like, oh, God.
I always find crying and cowering in a corner is pretty universal.
Yeah. Or running in one direction, screaming. What happened to you in Milan?
Yeah, I think Europeans just seem to take horror seriously as well. They don't ham it up. It's very realistic and in a horrible way, like Funny Games. Have you seen Funny Games? Yeah. It's horrible.
I haven't seen that.
It's basically two rich. Are they rich? Basically, two guys go around to rich people's houses, just knock on their doors, and again, there's something off about them where they're like, "Oh, could we borrow some eggs?" And there's something not quite right, and then they basically just spend the day murdering the family. And I think the game is like, you've got 24 hours and like, we're going to kill you. And then once they've murdered everyone, they just move on to the next house.
Oh, wow.
Pixar are in talks to a remake of it.
Yeah, sounds it.
Yeah.
Was there an American remake?
There was an American remake that was, again, sort of shot for shot. And I didn't mind it, really. But again, it still has the sheen.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's got a bit Clockwork Orange feel to it.
Yes, I would say so.
Yeah, so like kind of going back to the films there a little bit, it was an interesting set of 4 films that you chose because they were both like, I found Quarentine was kind of like a shot for shot like remake as well, and although there's obviously like the language differences, so the translations and things would have to go down different roads. It was a really good example of not remaking a film and actually making it for that audience where you completely change it. It was like a shot for shot and almost word for word remake of it all. But to the point, for me, it fell down more so with Rec and Quarantine, in that some of the scenes that they do in Rec, they do it so much better, and it actually became like more of a bit like disappointment watching
like what
the Quarantine bit. Just like a lot of the, as I say, because the Hollywood sort of sheen on it all made things a bit lighter. A lot of the just running around screaming bits for me in Rec, because it was so much darker and it was like, it was a very Spanish apartment block, and so it has that familiar but a little bit foreign feel to it. It just felt more engrossed and more like, oh God almighty, don't go around that corner, don't go around the corner. Yeah. Whereas with the Quarantine, it was a bit like, oh, just stop screaming, just go out the front door.
That's so funny because I thought that exactly. Well, I wrote down it doesn't feel as authentic, but this morning obviously it wouldn't have been helping that I was watching.
You've watched it 8 in the morning.
Like 8:30 in the morning, but I was in bed just like, oh my God, just stop screaming.
Yeah.
I understand it's a difficult situation, but it got boring. It was like the same, just the same cycle of things going on. Like, bam, there's a zombie, scream, quiet, bam, there's a zombie. And like, I was just like, okay, it's just repetitive now. Like, you need to get creative, I think, in that situation.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like a general release film either. It felt like an straight to BitTorrent. Or sci-fi film.
Yeah,
it's probably a better thing.
And that's again why I was quite surprised why Jennifer Carpenter took it on, because she was kind of like height of fame sort of
big
time.
Star.
Yeah, she's big star, and
probably because 90% of the budget was getting her.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it led on to slightly better things though. So I can't remember the name of the director, but he went on to do As Above, So Below. Have you seen that?
That's a great film.
I've
and so
heard
it's the
very
same
good
director.
reviews.
The again found footage film, but it's based in the Paris catacombs.
Yeah.
Instead.
That's really scary, that film.
Yeah. So that's the same guy who did Quarantine.
Is it really? Wow.
What's his name?
Well, same
John
director.
Erick Dowdle.
That's the one. Yeah. Yeah, that's him. Do you know what? I did have that on my notes here. I should have just actually unlocked my screen. But so he went on to do that, and so at least it was like a test run for him or something.
Yeah.
To
Did he do much after that?
I didn't do that much research.
You've done a lot, to be fair. It looks like you've got a lot of notes there.
I've done some. Well, yeah, it was. I mean, most of it was just my.
It's just Facebook.
It's just
It's just Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's just so you think he's got lots of writing there.
Yeah. Well, you said you start typing as soon as you realise what year it came out in. You're like, hold on, that's like Martyrs and Insides kind of era. Then, you just start typing, then away. But yeah, that's the thing that got me all excited, was that you'd already had, as I say, like High Tension, and there's another one called Calvaire, which I think was Belgian, but that was out a similar sort of year to High Tension. So you had those two of these cult European horrors. And Calvaire's completely mad. It's about this musician whose car breaks down in a countryside road, and he finds a little house. He's like, "Oh, can you help me?" And the guy, the sort of old farmer there, his wife had left him years before, and he'd had this big mental breakdown, and so he basically trashes the guy's car and keeps him there and convinces himself this guy is his ex-wife. So he dresses him up in her clothes, and he like shaves her head, and is like, now no one else will take you because she's mine. Yeah, and so, but then it gets ridiculous after that. You know?
After that,
yeah.
Oh, he actually starts hurting him after that. So
when will people realise if they break down in the middle of nowhere, that one house in the distance is not going to help you?
Don't
not the
go
place.
there.
Yeah.
Just live in your car, live off the land.
Yeah. And then a few years later, things like Rec and Frontiers and stuff came about. And it was like, that's 2007. So you've been hit with this onslaught of just these amazing horror films. And then the year after that, your man is that sort of like, hold my beer. I've got this film called Martyrs. It's about to be the pinnacle of everything. And sure enough, it sort of dipped down again after that a bit. And I need to sort of see what's been released recently.
Was that banned at first, Martyrs?
No, it's just that it's just topped every list of
disturbing films.
Of like, you need
It's
to watch
horrible,
this.
isn't it?
I'm sure I've seen it, but I can't.
Again, there's an American remake of that.
I haven't seen the American
I
one.
didn't see the American one.
Just, you didn't watch that at 8:30 in the morning as well, did you?
Martyrs. No, I did watch Hereditary in the morning, but that was because I was scared to watch it at night. So that was an active choice.
Yeah. I watched it thanks to our cinemas. I watched that at 2 p.m.
What, Martyrs?
No,
Hereditary.
Hereditary, yeah. No, I didn't. No,
We'd never get Martyrs over here.
I made the mistake, I think I said this on the podcast before, of being sick one day and thought, I need to find some horror films to watch. I watched Martyrs, Mordum, and a Serbian film in one day.
Oh my God.
I was a different person the next day.
Yeah, I can imagine.
You were a different person, like still.
Just woke there at 11 o'clock at night. Just give me Disney. Just give me Disney.
Yeah. I think we kind of touched on it, but Japanese horror, they've made loads of Japanese and Korean horror films because they do horror very, very well. And again, it's kind of not as realistic as European horror, but they don't do it in a way that I don't roll my eyes and go, oh, this is just ridiculous now. It's so, they make it so scary, something so unbelievable. So scary that it makes you think, geez, what if this could happen? Even though it couldn't, because it's...
Is the girl with the black hair like an actual Japanese folklore figure?
Because they're all...
She's been in so many different things.
They're different characters.
Yeah, no, but that sort of...
Oh, right,
reference,
yeah.
Entity.
This, like, demon.
Yeah, it's been in so many different things.
Maybe that's what makes it so scary, is because it is in Japanese tradition.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and it's so wildly different how they approach these things to British. I remember talking to a guy and another like horror enthusiast, and there was a friend of ours with us in a little group that we were chatting with, and they said, "This guy, have you ever seen a film and you knew it was a film, but it just made you go, oh, what?" You know?" And funnily, both of ours were Asian horror films.
What was yours?
Mine was Ring. The first time I watched Ring. Because all I knew about it was that it's a scary film, and Ring was the other one that influenced Blair Witch.
We watched it not so long ago, didn't we?
Yes, yeah. That was the other one that influenced Blair Witch. So the last broadcast and Ring, the two things. So I was like, oh God, I'm going to try this out because like I saw Blair Witch at the cinema, and it was like from there you were just like, oh wow. And the bit that really did me in, which is the big cultural difference, which maybe it's fine in Japan to do that, coming out the telly.
Yeah.
And so you think the telly's going to explode when she gets to the screen. Oh God, no, she's coming out of it.
Yeah.
Oh God, that's horrible. And the other guy was Audition was his one. And he did what you did actually, where he watched it in the morning by accident because he thought it was a different type of film. He thought it was a rom-com. But yeah, I think for me, it's the culture thing. It's a very, very different culture, but they approach the films in a totally different way as well. So, like, we've seen, like, The Exorcist, where she goes down the stairs, and that's in Grudge as well, you know, that thing. But the way they do it, for some reason, is just more uncomfortable, and it makes me feel...
Uncomfortable is the right word, yeah.
Yeah, it makes me feel uncomfortable having bones. Watching that go down.
Everything about it's alien, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
You look at the writing, looks from a Western perspective, looks like alien writing. It's everything is different when you see the Japanese stuff.
It is interesting. I don't know if it makes it a bit more sinister because from being in Japan, I always feel like a bit of a knob. But from when I was in Japan, it's everyone is so polite and genuinely lovely, and there's a massive, under the surface of it all, there's a massive weird sexual like very strange sexual desires going through Japan, and it has a similar feel with the horror. And I think it's the fact that they're so calm and lovely on the surface.
And that's one of the things that's a great point made, is that when you see people scared in Japanese or Korean or Chinese films, they look way more terrified. And you feel terrified on their behalf because you're like, how can another human being be that scared? And I think that's one of the things that is just, and it's, as you say, because they're quite placid, very
I never thought about that
people.
before. They do portray fear really well.
That's a really nice sentence, actually.
It's like when you watch the news and you think, okay, there's a conflict going on somewhere, but you don't understand it until you see a civilian who is either crying or scared, or you see real terror in people's faces. That's the thing that I get with like Asian horror, is that the innocents, the civilians or whatever in the films are genuinely terrified. Whereas as you, like in Quarantine or something, it's like,
yeah, it is like that.
Shut up! Would you either die or find an exit? You know?
That's so
And but in
either die or find an exit. Come on.
You kind of have that thing to it. And I was just trying to find, because there's an anniversary coming up while we're speaking of, it's not so much horror, but like have you seen Old Boy?
Yes.
Yeah. So and that's part of a trilogy. I
didn't know it was part of a trilogy.
Yeah, so there's a anniversary coming up that I saw the other day, because Arrow are doing a box set of the 3 films, and so there's Old Boy. There's one called Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, although Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance is first, then Old Boy, and then Lady Vengeance. They're all 3 of them are really good, but they're sort of going into that kind of Asian violent thriller / horror kind of genre again. That is one of those ones that really takes you into like Old Boy. They just do something a bit differently, where you've seen Reservoir Dogs and you've seen the ear cutting scene and things, but you ain't watched Old Boy when he cuts that fella's tongue out. That's really like
Does he slice? Is it an Old Boy? He gives him a Chelsea smile?
Chelsea smile. I think yeah.
God, I remember watching it in high school. I haven't watched.
Rough.
Yeah. I went round to a friend's and he was like, watch this film, it's great. And I was very like innocent in high school. Okay, like I'm going to watch a Korean film, or is it Korean or is it?
Yeah, I think it's Korean, yeah.
And then just being like,
you're not my friend anymore.
Mum, can you come pick me up? But I find that feeling I still get with the Blair Witch Project, and I hate people stood in a dark corner scares me. It just does. It's always something that has got to me. But it's the sound of her screaming in horror.
The off-camera
and it's just that noise and how terrified she is. It's still like I can feel it in my chest.
Yeah. I mean, that's something, because we watched that not long ago as well, didn't we? And revisiting that, and one of the absolute genius points they had, again, the use of dark and just the camera light, so you can see flashes of leaves and things, but you can't see anything 5 foot past you. So when you hear the screams in the distance, and I don't know whether that works more scary for like us living over here, because we've got plantations and things where you've camped out and things where you can like hear your echo around the forest and things. So to hear that, it's like, did I just hear a scream then? Oh my God! Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah.
I've just realised with all this, we watched this recently stuff. People don't realise we do other podcasts together. Our relationship is going to seem very different.
I like that they think that maybe we just live together, like Paul and Jaume, or the monkeys or something.
We're going to have to wrap it up soon because
cool, 'cause the
there's
news
going
is
to be
coming
the
up.
news. The news is coming up at 12.
Yeah, you get them.
Yeah, I mean, I know this is a very big question, but remakes, do you think they should be done, or do you think people should just accept them as a good film and put the effort in to experience them from a different culture?
I flip and flop on it.
Yeah, I think absolutely they should be made. They should be made with care. Obviously, you know,
There needs to be a long time in between as well.
There needs to be a long time in between. So I used to be quite like just watch the original, but I went to see The Exorcist a few years ago. There was a run of Halloween Hopchinay films in the run up to that, and I was in a room with maybe like a group of like early 20s, and they were laughing their heads off at The Exorcist. And I'm like, you need this remade for your generation.
Right,
Like,
okay.
you need that terror from the 70s now and make it more realistic. And, like, I can't wait for a proper Hellraiser remake because the visual effects we have now, like the Candyman remake is going to be amazing. And I really hope it scares the hell out of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I get
you're
why
right
people complain
with,
about it.
But I think you're right with like leaving a gap because with the ones
totally.
with the ones we happened to pick, I didn't realise that there was a consistency, but they were remade very quickly within.
Look at it. Obviously I haven't seen It Part 2 yet, but It Part 1 was better than It Part 1's original.
Right,
yeah.
You know, it's and let's say for instance, I mean we're in 2020. 2019 now.
Your name's Lee.
It's Saturday.
Yeah.
2030, say.
Yeah.
I reckon will be about the right time for a Jurassic Park remake because we haven't mentioned it in this podcast yet.
And I'm so glad we have.
But the thing is, like, Jurassic Park's my favourite film of all time. But if I was to turn around and say, yeah, you can't remake Jurassic Park, how selfish is that of me?
That's true.
So that, you know,
For
that
a
other
future
people
generation.
can't enjoy that story because when they look back on Jurassic Park when I was it's going to look like Lego characters.
Yeah, it
still.
doesn't have the same effect,
Yeah.
and that's very lovely, generous feeling actually to want other people to experience what you experienced. But to do that, you have to evolve and use what we have now.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Sweet, and we'll wrap it up there before Ed comes in and punches his way through the glass.
Oh no, it's lovely.
Like in Jurassic Park.
Yeah.